I'll turn it over to Jeanne to moderate this panel. Thank you.
Hi, how is everybody? Welcome back from lunch. So we have the great pleasure of keeping you awake after lunch, and I think we are going to do a great job of it. So we're going to mix it up a little. I'm going to introduce everybody because a great protective factor is to know who you have in front of you and to be able to make that relationship right away. So we're going to introduce everybody, and then we'll allow everybody to speak, but we're speaking in the order that we're sitting in, so that will help as well. So I have the great pleasure, and I'm going to let each person tell you more about themselves, but I have the great pleasure of introducing our, as Brett said, the panel that's been kind of talked about all day as far as protective factors go. And so we have Valerie, Dr. Valerie Spiva Collins with Friends National Center. Thanks for being here. And we have Dr. Reshma Shah, and she's with the University of Illinois, Chicago. So we're definitely delighted to have her as well. And we have Raney, who has just started a great nonprofit, One Trusted Adult. And so she's going to talk about that as well. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Valerie.
All right, thank you. And thank you to the McCain Institute for inviting me, and Neil and Brett. I've enjoyed being here and getting to know everyone, so I really appreciate that. Just briefly, my background, I have been in prevention and intervention my entire career. The first 15 years was in substance abuse prevention and early intervention. And then I spent about 6 years in teen pregnancy prevention and secondary prevention, working with pregnant and parenting teens. And for the last 15 years, I've been in injury and violence prevention. So I feel like I'm in the right place. I'm a preventionist, a primary preventionist for 35 plus years. That's my heart. But so the work that we do at Friends, I was thinking this morning as people were introducing themselves, we're not pure researchers, we're not pure practitioners, we're not clinicians. So you think, what the heck do they do? We do training and technical assistance, and the way I describe it is to say that we help people to understand the research and apply the research in programming. So we help states with evaluation, with identifying evidence-informed practices, with really engaging with parents to help them do program development, because we believe now that's the only way to really become more successful in the child welfare work that we're doing. So that's a really brief overview of what we do. Would you like me to go on into my talk, or do you each person tend to?
No, please, go
Okay,
for it.
all right. So from my first slide, you can see I want to talk about the protective factors, and trauma and well-being are hard not to include in this topic. Thank you. I need that. See if I can do this without my glasses. Let's see. Oops. So I wanted to share this first slide. I was at a conference, a child abuse prevention conference in the state of Virginia 7 or 8 years ago, and there was a rocket scientist there to present to us. He had been abused as a child and was really spending a lot of his extra time when he wasn't working on rockets talking about child abuse prevention and what could be done in the field and what his thoughts were. And he told the audience, he said, what you're doing is not rocket science. So we're thinking, oh, of course it's easier, right? But he said, it's not rocket science, it's harder, it's more complex. And over the years, I've started to think he's right. And for a lot of reasons that were shared this morning, people were talking about different issues, different ways of responding to the issues, and there are no straight answers, are they? We have some good science right now to work with, but we don't have all the answers. So I do think we're really working with some complex issues here. I'll figure this out in a minute. Yeah, I'm going the wrong way.
Upside down.
Oh, hey. Is that why it's not? I was going to say it's not intuitive.
We got you. We got you. This is a dream team.
Because I have it upside down.
I didn't even notice. I was like.
Oh, so the protective factors, just to give you a little of a definition that we use at Friends, they are skills, strengths, resources that help families deal with challenges. They're characteristics and attributes that help families to thrive. So they don't eliminate risk. You know, if we build protective factors within families, they don't help families to avoid anything from joblessness to homelessness to violence. but they may help that family to respond better to challenges that they face. And they have been identified through research. I first began looking at risk and protective factors in the 90s when I was working in substance abuse, and two men, Hawkins and Catalano at the University of Washington, to me, are some of the grandfathers of risk and protective factors. But more recently, we look at the work of the Center for the Study of Social Policy, which is based here in Washington, and the Administration for Children and Families, a federal office under the Department of Health and Human Resources, has also done a good literature meta-analysis of what's out there. So we base a lot of our work on what we learn from both of them. This slide, I thought, boy, I could skip it. I think we've heard this message clearly. I think it is critical that the first 6 months of life, there's so much development that goes on in the brain. The architecture of the brain grows substantially. And so if we can help parents to respond to their children when they have needs, we set up a nurturing environment, and the child learns that they can trust the parent and that there's safety in the world. The Harvard Center for the Developing Child describes it as a serve and return sequence. So the baby is babbling, crying, doing whatever babies do, and the parent or caregiver is responsive to that. And when that happens hundreds and thousands of times, a baby learns, my needs are going to be met, I'm safe here, I'm going to be nurtured. Now, that's not to say that if that doesn't happen, all hope is lost. I think that in our field, we're learning that there are positive experiences that can be brought to bear over the years, throughout the childhood years, and even into adulthood, to make things better for a person who did not have that experience early on. Some of you may be familiar with the research of a Dr. Bob Sege. I think he's currently at Tufts. He's been at Boston University and at Harvard as well. And he's come up with a framework called HOPE, which is healthy outcomes through positive experiences. And he talks about the fact that these positive experiences help to mitigate risk and traumatic experiences that children and others may encounter. So, what specifically are the protective factors? If you look at the Center for the Study of Social Policy that I mentioned a few minutes ago, you'll see that they named 5. We at Friends, we have to be a little different, we decided there were 6. And that's because nurturing and attachment, we're in agreement, I think, essentially, but they decided that nurturing and attachment comes through in the other 5. We felt it was important enough to include as its own protective factor. So I'll let you read those yourself, and I'm hoping some of the things I'll share as I go on will help to describe these more. I will say, again, today, we've heard about social connections and relationships. During COVID, did we not learn that more than ever? We need connection to other people. We need relationships. And whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you need connection with other people. Without it, we're not our best mentally. We don't have a sense of well-being. Parental resilience, we were having a little discussion at lunch about whether resilience is a good word to use. It may be overused. We see it as a person's ability to better respond to challenges. So it doesn't mean that you're fully able to be Superman and knock down everything, but it means that you've developed some skills and abilities to better manage challenges and model those for your children, that when things go wrong, you are able to address them. Doesn't mean you're not sad, doesn't mean you're not troubled, but you're able to regulate your emotions a little bit better. This was, again, I'm sorry I keep saying this. This was said this morning, but maybe it can't be said enough. The single most important factor for children to develop resilience is having a caring adult in their life. Does not have to be a parent. It's nice, it's ideal. We'd like to see it be both parents for every child, but it can absolutely be a teacher, it can be a coach, it can be a faith leader, it can be an auntie, it can be a grandparent. There are any number of people. I mean, I think about my father, whose mother left home when he was 12, which was very unusual in the 40s for the woman to leave. But I think my grandfather probably at that time wasn't the nicest guy. I mean, I know he took us for Slurpees and things, but in those days he probably was a little hard to live with. And the father was there. I mean, his father worked, and he worked hard, but he had the same child-rearing techniques that a lot of parents did in the 40s, so he probably wasn't the easiest person. But my father had a man that we came along, called Papu. He was like our grandfather because Papu worked in the school. He was a principal. My father saw that a black man could go to school, could be an educator, could be a leader in the community. And in fact, my father became a teacher, probably largely because of Papu. So it's not to say that he didn't get any caring and support from both of his parents, but I think if he had to name the one stable, committed, supportive relationship he had throughout his life until Papu died in his 90s, it would have been Papu and Mamu, his wife. So I've gone rather quickly because I wanted to spend a few minutes on my resources. Perhaps one of the reasons that Neil invited me to come and the reason that friends kept popping up when he Googled protective factors is that about 15 years ago, we developed a protective factor survey in partnership with the University of Kansas Center for Public Partnerships and Research. And this protective factor survey is used throughout the world, but primarily in the US, by programs that are working with families and helping them to build protective factors. And it's a self-administered tool that's used to determine whether the program has had some impact in helping families develop or strengthen their protective factors. Some programs only use a couple of the elements. They may only evaluate for developing concrete supports and parental resilience because that's what they feel their program activities are centered on. Others measure for all 6 domains. Just recently, in the last 5 years, we began developing what we call the Protective Factors Survey 2nd edition. Both are still available on our website. They're free. They're available to anyone who would like to use and learn about them. We have video tapes on our website that help you learn how to administer them. What we found over the years, though, is that it really needed to be administered retrospectively. And so we wanted to do a field test to see if it held up well in a retrospective administration, so that families take the test pre and post at the same time, at the end of their experience with the program. We were running into issues like ceiling effects with the traditional administration, where people may have rated themselves pretty high initially, maybe because they didn't know what they didn't know, or because there's that social desirability bias where they said, I don't want her to know that I'm not good at doing this with my kids, so I'm going to give myself a higher score. So anyway, we've made some of those corrections, and that's what the 2nd edition is about, but there are programs throughout the country that still use both. We're in the final stages of field testing the Protective Factor Survey 2 Spanish edition. So we've got a number of programs throughout the country testing those items for us, and we should have the final Spanish version, the 2nd edition, available within the next year. What happened to you? So I think it was one of the gentlemen that was up before lunch mentioned this phrase, and some of you may be familiar with Dr. Bruce Perry's work. He, I believe, started the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, but now he's gone to some other places to spread his wisdom. But, Oprah learned about his work and was just astounded. It spoke to her and what she grew up with as a child, the adverse childhood experiences she encountered growing up with her grandmother and her mother and her father and being moved around and feeling unwanted. And so she's really partnered with Dr. Perry, and they've come out with this book in the last year called What Happened to You? So not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And then we can begin to look at what do people need to heal. And then the last resource I'll mention is, and I'll have to say my staff is sick of me mentioning this book, okay? I read this book last summer in 2 different book clubs, and it has just stuck with me. My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies by Reshma. He's a clinical therapist based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but he was stationed in, I believe, both Afghanistan and Iraq during the wars and working with soldiers and some of the PTSD and trauma that they were encountering. But his book looks at 3 types of historical trauma. It looks at African American historical trauma, white trauma, and blue trauma. So he'll talk about white trauma, and before we were using the word white, in Europe, how what we call white now, populations traumatized each other. And so when those folks came to the Americas, they had this trauma within them that was unhealed, and perhaps that allowed them or enabled them to unleash so much trauma on other communities, the Native American community, the African American community. He talks about blue trauma, that traditionally we've expected police officers to deal with anything on the job and not really go through any help, therapy, counseling, whatever, to heal from their trauma. And so we put them right back out there and they re-traumatize the community. The other thing, the last thing I'll say, because I hope I'm not over my time, is that his book also deals with mindfulness and meditation, and at the end of each chapter, he has some exercises for us to do. And he says, do not read this book if you're not going to take the time at the end of each chapter to do these exercises. You will need to do those. And he goes back to his grandmother, he said, who growing up, he remembered she used to hum. She used to just sit there and hum and rock sometimes. And looking back later with all of his training, he says, I know now that that was the way she soothed herself. And he recommends that in her book now, in his book, as a way to heal ourselves. We can hum, we can rock, we can do a number of things. My grandmother used to hum. Never thought anything about it till I read his book. So I think that I'll stop there. I think I'm probably well past my time, and it's someone else's turn. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you, Brett. Thank you. I don't know where Neil went, but thank you, Neil, and the McCain Institute for inviting me. It's been awesome being here and connecting with so many of you. So clinically, as a developmental and behavioral pediatrician, I have the great privilege of working with children and their families with different developmental, behavioral, and learning disabilities. And then through my research work, I have the opportunity to work with other pediatricians and health systems to implement and evaluate strategies to support early childhood development. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm learning through these experiences with a focus on childhood development and on the healthcare setting as a way to improve protective factors for addressing targeted violence. So really briefly, developmental delays and disabilities is a broad term to describe conditions that impact development in a range of different domains for a child, including social emotional skills and communication. And it includes conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, intellectual and learning disabilities, as well as ADHD. And I think it's really important to know and understand about developmental delays and disabilities because it affects so many children. 1 in 10 preschool-age children and almost 20% of children less than 17 years of age. And I think the impact of this number is really put into perspective when you compare it to other really common conditions that come up in the pediatric field, such as asthma and food allergies. And clinically, these numbers are really important because we know that childhood development is predictive of academic, emotional, and behavioral outcomes, as well as later educational achievement, economic, mental, and physical health. So compromises in a child's development can have profound impacts across their lifespan. And it doesn't only affect the child, but can also affect their caregivers with elevated reports of unmet healthcare needs, poor mental health outcomes with increases in depression and anxiety, as well as increased financial and unemployment burdens. But this is not the trajectory that children who have disabilities and delays must experience, or their caregivers, and that's what I want to focus on. There's absolutely ways to protect a child's health and well-being. From a developmental perspective, we know that children's development is not, that children don't thrive in isolation, but that their development is dependent on the relationships around them, their community, and societal factors, which is why having policies and programs in place that impact these multi-level factors is so critical. And as part of those programs, what I wanted to focus on next is the use of the healthcare setting and routine visits in particular. So these routine visits within the healthcare system have a lot of advantages. So we already have an established infrastructure in place. It's non-stigmatizing. There's frequent and well-attended child visits, and it's accessible to a large proportion of families. And we're trying to leverage some of these advantages with a program we call Sit Down and Play, where this program aims to encourage key caregiver-child interactions and opportunities for learning. And we deliver it in those first 3 years of life during that untapped time where you're just kind of stuck waiting for your pediatrician. And we've had some really positive results both in Chicago and in India. But I definitely recognize that integrating programs within the healthcare system is not without its barriers, including financial and personnel constraints. But despite these barriers, I think that these routine visits offer so many opportunities to improve protective factors, including integrating treatment for other comorbidities that we know impact childhood development, such as mental health treatment, as well as caregiver mental health treatment. Connecting, using these routine visits to facilitate connections to other adult figures. And I know Brooklyn's going to be talking a lot about this, who might not necessarily be parents, but who can provide opportunities for learning and those critical caregiver interactions that research shows is so instrumental. And then linkages to other community-based supports, such as WIC programs, nutrition services, and school-based therapeutic programs. And I just wanted to highlight the latter part for the remainder, because research shows that when children with developmental delays and disabilities receive needed therapeutic services, so speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral therapies, it can have dramatic improvements in their development, including increases in IQ score, social emotional skills, communication skills, and lowers their risk for later negative sequelae. And when their children receive needed therapeutic services, caregivers also benefit with reduces in loss of financial income, improvements in their mental health outcomes, and increases in parental empowerment. But despite all the benefits of receiving therapeutic services, almost 50% of school-age children are not receiving recommended therapeutic services. And while the reasons are certainly complex, but because of systemic factors influencing clinical access as well as educational resources and funding, what is clear is that the burden is disproportionately endured by historically marginalized children who face well-documented disparities in accessing therapeutic services. And because school-age children receive therapeutic services in two main settings, so their clinic and the school, I think it's critical to develop strategies to coordinate care across these two settings, because a child's medical home and their educational home are both so vital in supporting their health and well-being, but too often they work in silos. So for example, our work showed that a lot of pediatricians have really limited interaction with the educational sector, in part because of knowledge gaps, not knowing what IEPs are or what services schools can even offer families, and also time constraints. So as a first step, we tried to tackle these provider-level barriers, and we conducted trainings, and we implemented processes to streamline referrals, and we had really significant results. But what we found was that even though now pediatricians were so much more knowledgeable about IEPs and were providing this information to families, almost 75% of their patients were still not receiving services 9 months later. And so now we're working with patient navigators to help families facilitate access to services, because what this work really highlighted was that the process of obtaining services can be incredibly complicated, stressful, and long. So for example, in Illinois, schools have 60 school days, not calendar days, but school days to complete an IEP evaluation. So what that means is that if a caregiver requests an IEP evaluation in September, October, it is well until that second half of the school year before that child is receiving any therapeutic services. And this is really significant because for a large portion of children in this country, accessing clinical services is not feasible. So children are relying on schools for therapies that are so vital for their developmental, behavioral, and learning needs. So in summary, developmental delays and disabilities can have significant impact on a child's life. Leveraging the healthcare setting and routine visits offers one strategy to improve protective factors, but prevention and treatment programs are going to require integrated and coordinated strategies to address these multi-level factors. And I just wanted to end with this quote because while many recent events, I think, are weighing so heavily on us and those we care about, I still, really remain hopeful that we can move in a positive direction for our country and for our children. And these words remind me of our role in supporting that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Valerie. Yeah, I mean, come on. Thank you for the resources you shared. Thank you. Sit and play. I think we should institute that at these symposiums in the future, actually. Sit and play rooms outside. Thrilled to be here. My name is Raney. I'm from One Trusted Adult. I am an educator. I am a mother. I am a summer camp director. And I'm the founder of something called One Trusted Adult. And we are on a mission to ensure that that every young person on this planet can name a trained, committed, and motivated, trusted adult. I'm fired up to share with you what we're doing in New Hampshire and how we're partnering with schools and other youth-serving organizations, juvenile justice, social services, foster youth in New Hampshire and beyond. This mission began in a school auditorium. So as a school administrator, I sat in the auditorium, and 1 month, other educators out here, you're gonna know the month where they just cram all the prevention programs into that 1 month. Yeah, I see some nods, right? It's like we're gonna hit suicide prevention, substance abuse prevention, sexual violence, maybe we'll throw in an active shooter drill. We're just gonna hit them all and check every box in 1 month. And I sat there as a school administrator, just meeting after meeting, and our students hearing these messages over and over. And finally, after maybe the 4th meeting, when I heard this term used again of every student in the room, they say to them, if you have a worry, concern, or fear, reach out to a trusted adult. And it was the 4th time where it kind of stuck. Like, we hear it, but what does it mean? And I sat in that room looking at the 300 plus teenagers in my care and thought, did they look at us in the way that these programs are advertising? That we, the chemistry teacher and the theater teacher and the ski coach, are we the trusted adults that these people are saying we are and we're supposed to be? And do we, the adults, even see ourselves that way? Because most of us walk into the building like, oh, the curriculum, the standards, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. Am I getting out of my car in the morning and walking to a building thinking, I'm showing up as a trusted adult today? And in my experience, that wasn't happening. At the school that I was on the admin team for, it just wasn't happening. That wasn't the ethos, that wasn't the feeling, that wasn't what we were doing there. And so I worked to create a program within, well, first I looked for a program. Like, who can come in and train us to be trusted adults? And I couldn't find anything. And so just internally started to build a program that would help us focus on healthy, sustainable relationships with young people. At the time, a history of sexual abuse was being unveiled in youth-serving organizations across the country. Boy Scouts, US Gymnastics, it felt like it was just every time I opened the Boston Globe, there was another spotlight, another story on this. And so while I'm asking teachers, lean in, let's build these strong connections, they're saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Do you see what's happening out here? We're not sure where the line is anymore and what our relationship with a young person is really supposed to look like when we are their teacher. It was also a time when I was seeing massive burnout in educators, and I say that was 7, 8 years ago, and now times 100. So teachers heard me saying more, right? More. And I was saying, this is not one more thing on the plate, this is the plate. We just haven't talked about the plate yet. We've been giving you mashed potatoes and salmon and brownies and all kinds of things with no plate, and you're trying to juggle it all. I want to give you the plate. Because the plate is the relationship we have with young people, and the plate is the relationship we have with each other, which we've heard again and again this morning about this community, this social network. So I then became obsessed at that point with finding research-backed strategies for building healthy connections, but also healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries that keep youth safe, child protection, safe from abuse, but also that keep educators safe from burnout. The research I found when I set out was undeniable, and we've heard about a lot of it. A large number of studies show that just one trusted adult, just one, can have a profound and positive impact on a child's life. We see greater resilience, stronger engagement, although we can come back to that word. I hope we come back to that word. And improved physical and emotional wellness. And through our own research in New Hampshire, in partnering with schools, we're studying both if a child has a trusted adult at home and can name a trusted adult at school specifically. They're less likely to bully or be bullied, less likely to abuse substance, less likely to report struggles with anxiety or depression, and they're less likely to drop out of school. And I always like to make the positive. Dr. Bill talked to us this morning about the optimism. They're more likely, if they can name a trusted adult at home and at school, they are more likely to be able to turn toxic stress into tolerable stress, remain calm in the face of challenges, complete tasks that they start, show interest in new things, volunteer in their classrooms and after school. They're more likely to participate in physical activities and show a greater availability for learning. That's when I can really get the teachers. Let me show you how a relationship with a young person can increase their availability for learning of your beloved topic of chemistry or biology or whatever it is that gets you excited in the morning. Let me show you how that relationship will change the way they learn in your classroom. We spend a lot of time, we start with who was there for you in our trainings. Who was there for you? And I'm going to invite all of you in a moment, so I want you to start thinking about if that person, if there was someone there for you. So think back to your adolescent self. Think about what kind of clothes you wore. I bet you had some good outfits, Rachel. Yeah, I know you had. What was your haircut like? I had a sweet do. What posters were on the wall of your bedroom? Like, think about your bedroom. Most of my friends had like JTT and the Backstreet Boys. I don't know why. I had Prince William on mine, but I don't, and nobody asked me about that in the Q&A. I don't know. And so once you've had a laugh remembering yourself as an adolescent, think about whose opinion mattered to you. Think about someone that you wanted to make proud. Think about someone you didn't want to disappoint. And think about that person you would go to with a worry, a concern, or a fear. And if you are someone in this room who cannot name a trusted adult, you are not alone. In the trainings we do across the country, we see in a room like this, about 60% of adults can name anyone that showed up for them that they could trust when they were younger. And those other 40% who can't, I think, are the world's superheroes, because I mostly work with youth-serving professionals and educators who are showing up for youth in a way that no one showed up for them. That's superhero status to me. So if that's you, I want you to think about how does not having someone that you can name as a trusted adult influence the way you show up for youth today, whether that's in your parenting, in your practice, in your classroom. You're going to turn to a partner. Is it okay if I use my time? 2 minutes for discussion, breaking up the panel style. And I'd love for you to share with your partner about that person. Ready?
Brooklyn, we can role model.
Oh, we're gonna talk about it up here?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we're gonna do it up here too. Please share with your partner right now. Go ahead. Do you think they'll cut our mics?
Oh, I know. It's like, mine was my aunt. He wasn't even my biological aunt. Yeah, like in the Indian community, like my parents came here and they didn't have like my biological aunts and uncles were all in India, but yeah, she was like somewhat, and even to this, she's passed away, but she was like my second mom, and I would always, I remember saying, oh, I wanted to do this, initially, medicine was not what I wanted to do. And she's like, why would you do that? I think I said something that she was like, no, you can do things, aim high, I think I was just kind of maybe I'll, work on, work in retail. I think I said something
I feel very,
and I was like, you're right,
Still, like,
you know.
there's some lines that you
Did she
have in
know
there that I'm
before she
like,
passed, like, what
okay, that was a big, powerful line. I just need to
I think
digest
so,
that.
but I wish I would have been more direct about that. Yes, and they know, and her husband knows, and I feel like she does know, like she was like part of my like, but I just wish I would have said it like more directly, you know. And yeah, it makes me sad when I think about that.
If you tell their children, you'll see the ripple effects. Like, if you share her story and what she did for you, you'll encourage another person to show up for another person. And then you'll see the ripple effect.
I like that.
There.
Who's your person?
I had so many, which is why, like, I lived in a small town, grandparents this block, grandparents that block, aunt and uncle, lifeguards, coaches. I had so many, and that's why when I got into education and was sitting with kids saying,
So the people that she was asked, did she ask us who we could go to?
like how fortunate I am. Like, I was relationally rich.
Yeah.
And others are not, and that's a lot of why.
But they
like,
were supportive. They were
That's
always
so
there. They're the ones that wanted to
amazing.
please and impress.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mine was a
All right,
little
friends.
Thank you. Okay. She was the school librarian.
Bring it back.
And I just,
Baby, come
without
back.
her, I think the world of her.
You got a good voice.
Just like her, and we go there more.
Yeah.
Clap once if you can hear me. Clap. Oh my God, there are.
Okay.
You know there are educators in the room. Did everyone see that happen? I was like, clap once if you can hear me.
Yeah.
We had a moment up here. I kind of forgot that you were all here. Thank you, Reshma, for sharing. That was beautiful. I hope you had some good conversation and good moments. And don't let this be the last time you talk about this today. That was too fast. I will encourage you, if you did share about someone today, that your assignment tonight is to contact that person, to call that person, to write to that person, to thank that person. And if that person has passed, as we talked about up here, tell their children. Tell their nieces and nephews, tell their spouse, tell someone about that person, because one way we can ensure every child has a trusted adult is talking about the people who showed up for us and how important it was, because that gratitude, that ripple effect will go out and remind people of just how important relationships are and that one adult can be. You got your homework assignment? Okay. So we've been conducting interviews all over, hundreds and hundreds of interviews on exactly this, sitting down with people and hearing the stories of their trusted adults. And what we've heard again and again is, my trusted adult always made me feel safe, was fair and predictable, knew me and noticed me, was invested in my success, was there for me when I needed them, challenged me when I needed it, and celebrated me when I deserved it. And what was really interesting that emerged is that it became clear there's 3 critical qualities in trusted adults. And we don't talk about this. And this is, yes, for educators, but we're working with parents and mentors and all adults. Those 3 qualities are being accessible, being boundaried, and being caring. When we talk about accessibility, we talk about being approachable, present, and able to be reached. This is not just about availability of time, but if you ask a young person, it'll be like, when they come into your space, you smile and you look at them and you put your phone away. You put your device down, that you're actually truly present. To be boundaried, we define as operating within safe, appropriate, and healthy relational, and sometimes professional, if we are in a formal role with a young person. In all of our relationships, we can handle boundaries in one of 2 ways. We can take control and set our expectations around physical touch, intellectual exchange, emotional vulnerability, material sharing, and time. Or we can sort them out as we go along, and we run into confusion and disagreement and all the things that happen in conflict when we don't talk about our boundaries up front. So we are big proponents, and we help people have conversations about boundaries up front in all relationships. And last of all, caring. Concern for investment in the well-being of another. Deep down, you feel that they are committed to knowing, naming, and valuing you and those around you, and they have an honest want to help you succeed, to achieve your goals, and to be well. And we are trying to define this both for adults showing up for young people, but also training young people to be able to recognize what a trusted adult looks like. It is in the overlap of these qualities where we're finding that trust is built, the healthiest sense and strongest sense of trust is built, and burnout is beat. That accessibility without a boundary is like, my door is always open, call me anytime. We know, yeah. With a boundary is, here's where to find me, and here's when I'm available to meet with you, and then showing up and being present. Caring with no boundary is like, I care endlessly. I will absolutely go to the ends of the earth and burn myself out caring for and we know all these teachers out there because they have these amazing hearts. But without that boundary, they will not be able to show up for youth year after year after year. They have to have that boundary. Like, we cannot live like I will do anything. Like, we got to boundary that, right? We've got to boundary that. You like that?
Yeah, very good.
I can't go into it, obviously, up here today, but I wanted to just flash sort of how we then drive into practical skills and strategies for building accessibility. We talk about a with, not for mindset. It's sort of like sit and play. Like, it's getting on the ground and working with young people, not doing for young people. We talk a lot about the universal youth needs and the basics. Another presentation. Questions, not answers, modeling vulnerability and courage, presence and playfulness, and declaring motive, telling people why. Why do you show up day after day? We call them magnets and mirrors. So how do we attract, energetically invite people into our space, into relationship? How do we advertise ourselves as someone who wants to actually be in relationship? And also, mirrors are a connection tool in that people gain insights about themselves when they spend time with you. And there's specific ways to do that. Boundaries. Again, this is like the anchor of our entire program for so many reasons. Again, protecting youth and protecting adults. Most boundary trainings, if you're an educator, you know it's a litany of forbidden practices, all the things you cannot do when you work with youth, but very rarely do you find a training that tells you what are things you can do to set and maintain, and then reset sometimes, healthy boundaries when we are working with other people's children. And we break that down into brick wall boundaries, chain link boundaries, baby gate boundaries, and invisible fences to get at the complexity and layers and the ways that we show up and work with young people. And these are some of the strategies that we follow. And lastly, caring. We think care is pretty simple, right? If I care about a person, I show up and care. We use that word a lot. I've been studying the actions and expressions of that care. And so I've actually been coding interactions between mentors and young people and figuring out what levers they're pulling. And what I've found so far, and this is very early research towards my doctorate, but essentially a trusted adult is either cheerleading, challenging, comforting, or coaching in any given moment. And no one of those is better than another. Young people need all of those in their corner. But what is happening, and what's most fascinating in schools, is that research right now shows about 50% of students on average can name a trusted adult at school. About half. Not good. We want to be at 100. I won't stop until we're at 100. We're at about 50 on average. Lowest I saw was 8%. 8% of students in a school could name a trusted adult. What happens though is within that number, so those 50%, let's say, they're all naming the same 4 to 5 adults. We know the people. And when we run them through our quiz we take on which way they lean with their care, again, we all use all of these modes, but we lean in certain ways. It's the cheerleaders and the comforters in the school that get named again and again and again as the trusted adults. And really, I think this is an opportunity to build capacity in all adults to be able to use all of these modes. And it's also about training young people and helping young people understand that I can trust a challenger and I can trust a coach if they live by the ABCs. Somebody challenging me is invested in my success and improvement. They can potentially be worthy of my trust and a bridge to building a relationship. So that's how we are working to redefine characteristics of healthy relationships between adults and young people. I will wrap up by saying to be who you need and be who you needed. Sometimes I can get really excited about all the specific strategies, but if I can go back to any one point, it is to think back to yourself, that adolescent, that young person, and think about what it was that you needed, and think about what it is you need today, and be that colleague, and be that friend, and be that partner, and continue showing up for youth. Our resources, and we offer a school-wide campaign, as well as an assessment tool, middle school advisory program, high school advisory program. I loved the question earlier about SEL and CRT because we are developing resources that meet the ABCs, so they are boundaried, as to not put a teacher in the position of a mental health professional, which they have not been trained to do, and does not hit any of those hot trigger words right now. We've sanitized it because my stance on it, and I'm standing where my feet are, and like I love that quote, is that I need these skills. We say personal skills for community contribution and leadership. You were looking for words earlier. What we say is personal skills for community contribution and leadership, because we know that young people who feel needed and are invited and taught how to offer their unique skills, gifts, and strengths, that is like the protective factor. So the trusted adult that can provide that for them, and if I can give them resources to do that, we're going to change the world. So thank you all so much for having me, and that's a little bit about One Trusted Adult.
That's awesome.
So I want to thank our dynamic and wonderful panel, and you kept everybody awake right after lunch. I have to tell you, you got me with ski coach. The Virginia girl was like, ski coach at school?
New Hampshire.
Because you're New Hampshire. Yeah. And I also wanted to comment, that's not unique to your state. 60 days is the federal law.
So 60 days, but some
60
days.
No, school days, open school days. So if you have a disruption of weather, that doesn't count towards your 60 days, school days. So that is a federal law. That's not just your state.
But different states, because it's up to, and this is my understanding, so the lawyers out here, please correct me if I'm wrong. But IDEA states 60 days. And so different states have different interpretations of that. So in Illinois, they qualify it by saying 60 school days, whereas other states, for example, I think it's North Carolina or Massachusetts, say 30 calendar days. And so it is up to different states to still qualify what that days is. So that's why, when we have, in Chicago, we have families that come in from, different neighboring states that have different laws, and so, or interpretations of that legislation.
Okay, so we'll take questions and answers. And I think we have one way over there in the back.
Thank you. I have one question for Dr. Collins and one question for Ms. Raney. For Dr. Collins, you talked about the Friends Protective Factor Survey, and that seemed to be like an individual level survey, like for family dynamics. What about communities? Are you putting together a community protective factors, or does that already exist? And then for Ms. Raney, you talked about how every child should have access to one trained, trusted adult. And I'm wondering, is your goal to train parents, or do parents not count, and every kid should have a trained adult who's not a parent? Thank you.
Yeah, so for the Protective Factor Survey, it's not designed to assess an individual family. So it's not an assessment tool or a diagnostic tool. Individual parents take the assessment, their data is combined, and it's used to assess a program's effectiveness. And so then you also asked me about communities. Our protective factors have been researched based on the way I just described, individuals taking the tool to assess a program. There are organizations that are looking more at community protective factors. The Prevention Institute, which is based in Sacramento, California, but serves the entire country, is focused a great deal on community protective factors, community violence, and prevention strategies. So you might want to look at some of their work and their tools that are available online.
And I love the question for me. We are, as a minimum, I say we are ensuring every child has at least one trusted adult. So my mission right now is one, but the dream is many, that every child has a whole bunch of people in their corner rooting for them, supporting them. Our training, we have an e-course now that is for educators. There's one for educators, there's one for parents, and there's one for mentors. The reason we focus on parents is to create common language and shared language between educators and parents so that there is an understanding of how we're going to work together in the best interest of this young person in partnership as a team. There's a whole section on there on the giving and receiving of feedback, healthy practices. It's called Ouch, Thank You. And for the parents and the educators to have conversations about how they want it, like setting the boundaries of that relationship up front. The parenting one specifically talks about how to show up for a trusted adult for your own child, how you show up for other people's children. So often people name that it was their friend's parent that was their trusted adult. So how you might show up as a trusted adult for other people's children. And then how to expect other trusted adults to show up for your child. What are you looking for in that soccer coach or that band director or whoever else is showing up with your child? How do you engage in partnership? So that is the dream for sure, is the team.
I have a question for Brooklyn. Have you found in your work in the schools or with students that they need training on how to access a trusted adult? Like how to open up to one, how to find one, how do they know who to trust and who not to?
Yes, and it drastically impacts the data. I was working with a principal called from Kansas and said, I Googled one trusted adult and you came up and I just need to talk to someone. I was like, I'm here for you, tell me your problem. And she said, social emotional learning, we have this mission of community, we have an amazing, it's incredible. And we do a survey and we asked the students, can you name a trusted adult? And only 40% said they could. So I put that in front of the staff and you know what? They were mad. They're like, after all we do for them, they're not naming us. And so I just simply said, well, did anyone explain to them what a trusted adult is? And she's like, oh man, no. And so part of our Operation OTA, we call it, is 2 lesson plans that break down the ABCs for young people to introduce the language and even what you're looking for, and then create a gratitude campaign as well. Because when we thank the adult for showing up for us, guess what? They're like, me? And they continue showing up, even in a stronger way, a more attentive way. So yes, I am about closing that gap. And I'll say, sorry. I was running a pre-service teacher training. So some college programs have picked up One Trusted Adult, the book, and are studying it in pre-service teacher, which is incredible. And I get to go into these classrooms and talk to them about it. And I'm fascinated. These are 18, 19, 20-year-old people who are really digging in now to the relationships. And they looked at the ABCs, and this one young woman raised her hand, and she's like, does this apply to my relationship with my boyfriend? And I was like, well, I'm not a relationship specialist, but let's break it down. Like, you want to go there? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I'm not Dr. Phil, but like, let's play this out. And what was incredible is having that conversation about trusted adults and the qualities of good relationship absolutely applied to all of our friendships, a roommate situation, and just, again, provided that plate to hold like a really important conversation. So I think having these conversations with kids leads to healthier friendships and hopefully healthier romantic relationships and partnerships as well.
I have a question about the trusted adult. Just want to know what are the competencies and skills a trusted person should acquire. I know that the person should take care, the boundaries, you have described them all very well presented here. But what exactly in terms of, and how this is, how a trusted adult, in what way is going to build that trust and communicate? I mean, one of the skills could be communication. So what other skills or competencies, if you can specifically name them, what an adult trusted person require?
Yeah, how long do you have? We could do the whole foundational training right now.
No, maybe
4 hours?
Maybe a few of them.
How about one I'll share with you that which I love would lead into a question on resilience potentially, because we talk a lot about the quality of vulnerability. And in schools, we say, it's a safe place to fail, you can try. And so adults are trained to say to kids, it's okay to fail, but don't often show them that it's okay to fail by failing themselves. And where I learned the most about this was at circus camp. Did anyone go to circus camp? I'm the only person in the room that went to circus camp. This is uncomfortable. But I was back there and I was actually observing circus camp from this perspective of trusted adults and resilience. Are you two okay? Okay. Failure, did not go to circus camp. And I was watching, on the final day, this 5-year-old is up there juggling in the final performance, and all the parents and grandparents are sitting there, and they've got like, the parents have the iPhones and the grandparents have like the iPad, and then it's like flapped out with all, like it's just a wall, a screen, like this poor 5-year-old looking at it like billboards, like screen. And do you mind if I stand up? I knew this was gonna happen. Okay, he's up there juggling away, like, and he drops one of the pins. And the whole crowd went, exactly, good cue. Like gasp. Like we felt it for him, right? We felt failure for him before he even like realized what had happened. We adults placed our feelings on this child, 5 years old. Drops the pin, we're all, This baby had been trained by circus professionals to do this. Hey! To which the crowd erupted, cheering for him, and he picked it up and he kept going. 5 years old, juggling, failure could be a traumatic event, right? Hey, picks it up and keeps going. I was like, I have needed this my entire life, because I am an incident magnet. So a week later, I'm in the grocery store in Meredith, New Hampshire. I'm at Hannaford's, and I clip the orange thing, and the bucket of oranges go all over the produce aisle. And everyone went,
Oh, wow.
turn away from me, right? They're like, oh, me? Hey! They're like, oh, yeah! And they help me pick up the oranges. I'm like, this is genius. I'm going to teach everyone. I didn't know I was going to teach you today, but I'm going to teach everyone I encounter. So I'm speaking at a school. I'm talking about building trusted relationships, closing this gap. And I'm talking about vulnerability. So I'm speaking to a group of 9th graders. They're at a boarding school for the first time. They're from all over the world. They are terrified, shaking, sitting there like this. Like, they're scared. And I teach them the circus clap. And there's laughter, and we're having a great time. And a week later, a principal called me and said, you saved a 9th grader's life. And I was like, is that a good testimonial to put in tell me, like, how did I save a life? She said a 9th grader was walking up on a stage like this in front of 1,000 of her new high school classmates at some matriculation, signed the book and inducted into the school. And she's wearing a mini skirt. And she tripped and fell. And it went up over and everything was out and the whole school. But she hopped up. Hey! And the whole school cheered. And the principal was like, I'm not kidding. She's now known as like this girl instead of like, ooh, this, right? Life-changing. Protective factor, circus clap, learn it, know it, spread the word. But I think that's one thing we can do. Like, one, and there's many list of strategies, but one is fail in front of young people. Yeah. Trip, fall. Fail, have things in your teeth, like fail in front of them and show them it's okay, and then show them your resilience, show them your vulnerability, show them how you pick yourself up. Don't just talk about it, do it. Don't ask me any more questions or you're gonna get a full story.
I want to work for her.
I know.
Watch out, Kim.
I'm totally on board with
Kim,
more
we
questions. I'm on board with more questions.
You guys are amazing. Can we stay here all day? Dr. Collins, I was wondering if you can elaborate on the 6 criteria. Is there some prioritization in the data? And also wondering, from young people and transitioning into adulthood, if there's some arcs that you can speak to that may be important. And I have a second question for Dr. Reshma.
So let me ask a clarifying question. The arcs that what type of arc are you referring?
Just wondering if, from young people that either have had mastery or the supports, what a difference it's made in transitioning to adulthood versus those who have not, and maybe what some of those gaps are. Just, curious about that.
Okay. Well, to your first question, you were asking if there's a hierarchy among the protective factors.
Yes, please.
We have not found that to be the case. What we recommend is that community agencies do a needs assessment of the people that they are intending to serve. And they may know that in their community, a lack of concrete supports is significant, that there are a lot of families living in poverty. For example, in West Virginia, they fund a number of family resource or family success centers. Some of you may be familiar with those. And they are in communities. They provide things based on what that community may most need. It may be job assistance for parents. It may be a food pantry. In talking to a person that ran one of those family resource centers, she was sharing that as the coal mines have shut down, they've got lots of people with maybe a high school diploma who were making $60,000 plus. And when the coal mine shuts down, they knew they would never again make that kind of money. Where can you go in America with a high school diploma or less and make that kind of money? And they were having to come into their food pantry for the first time in their lives. They used to donate to the food pantry. So in their community, concrete supports would be a significant need. I don't know that social connections would be. It's a smaller community. People may have known each other. They may have felt like they had that kind of support. So it depends on the community and the people you're serving, which protective factors you may emphasize. There are some agencies that their goal is to build all 6 within the people that they're serving. Other folks are focused more on 2 or 3, ideally based on an assessment of their community.
Thank you so much. And I have a question also for Dr. Reshma, Shah. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very powerful. And I was wondering, particularly for the communities that are underserved and not able to gain access to the services that are more readily available to other communities, if there are specific initiatives in place to help address that gap. And my secondary question is for children who are able to leverage services in the school environment, but then they transition, they graduate, and those structures are no longer available. Are there programs or best practices to help provide sustained services for young adults that have transitioned out of high school? Thank you.
Thank you. Those are great questions. So I think that in terms of how to support children who are facing barriers in accessing services, I think it really, at some point, this is a huge policy issue. And I guess that's why I was kind of, saying like about the school days, because at some point, things need to be a little more level, Like, it can't be okay that in one state, my vocabulary is not great, and especially up in front of all of you, but I was gonna say screwed if you're like, it's been, you have 60 school days, and if you live in Massachusetts, you can get services within a month. I mean, it's not right. And on top of that, I'm in Chicago, and there's huge inequities based on the zip code you live in within the city and the services that you receive. So sometimes it's not even about like a yes/no checkbox in terms of are you getting services, but what kind of quality services are you getting, And so I think at some point there has to be an acknowledgement of the systemic factors that have contributed to this and addressing and addressing them. And along that line, I think also looking within the healthcare system, and this I think goes to the second question you had asked, when they're aging out of school-based services, but also when they're within the school-based services. Again, in Illinois, certain therapies, if you have autism, are covered by private insurance, but they're not covered if you have Medicaid. Again, that's not okay. Like if you had any cardiac disease, as an adult, and we were like, hey, you take atenolol, that'll help with your blood pressure, but oh, you have public health insurance, you don't get that. Like that would never fly. So why is that okay that we're doing that to our youth who have disabilities? And so I think at some point this needs to have a broader voice and be brought to attention.
Yeah. Mic drop.
I might be loud enough. Can everybody? Okay, all right. Okay, awesome. Well, so I've been working in education for well over 20 years. I'm sorry, and I do.
Me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Reshma, Shah. Reshma, like, okay, yes,
Reshma.
I'm shy.
Okay, gotcha. So I was just wondering about what your thoughts were, just because I do believe that I have seen personally where parents are pushing their children to get diagnosed with things because there are certain benefits that come with that as well, right? And so I myself am more so of an advocate of the time that it takes because of I work in DC public schools. So with those 60 days that are there is supposed to be like a social worker involved. There are supposed to be other interventions, like all these other things, that should have taken place beforehand, but also that take place during that time to ensure that we're not just throwing this child in there. And so I just want to know your take on that, and where do you see that part of it? Because often I see children who may not really need that, or that may not be where they are, but it's more comfortable for their parent or even more comfortable for the teacher to have that child diagnosed, opposed to dealing with the real core issue or the real trauma that really lies within the child. And like, how does that show up in this work? Because of course we want to be preventative, but we also don't want to enable, or even sometimes that can change the trajectory of a child's life, because nothing was, they didn't really have that issue, but because of the adults in their life, not having trusted adults, they are now diagnosed with that. They're in this stigma, and they feel like, well, I can really read, or I don't really need these services, but now I have to I've witnessed plenty of children in 20 years being told, like, you better not go in there, read everything, or when you go to school, make sure you act this way so that they can keep. Just think about like those.
I hear you, yeah, and I definitely see that too, and I'm totally on board. I don't think that kids should be just given a diagnosis just to be given a diagnosis, and then again, like, who is getting diagnoses and what diagnoses are they getting, I think is also important. Like, for example, oppositional defiant disorder. I don't use that diagnosis, but that is way more, if you are an African-American boy, you are getting that diagnosis. If you are a white girl, you are not getting that diagnosis. And so there is these inequities in that. So I do think, putting like diagnoses for that, and to your point, doing a quality evaluation makes sense. I wonder if it would be, in an ideal world, like if it isn't about the diagnosis. When I'm working with families, I always say, like, I don't care about your I don't care about your diagnosis. I haven't met parents who really care about a diagnosis. It's like, as a parent, you want, like, what services can I put in place that can help my child, right? Like, that's all we want for our kids, like, just for them to be able to thrive and learn. And so I think it's like identifying strengths, like where is your child's strengths? Like, how can we support those strengths? Are there challenges that exist? And yeah, there might be a couple of families that, have other reasons why they might want a diagnosis, but I feel like that is just, in my experience, and is really like the minority of the families. I feel like far more families are struggling to just get services, but I do hear you. I think there is that disconnect, and you for sure don't want to be putting labels and diagnoses on kids inappropriately. So I think that, using culturally sensitive materials and doing proper assessments is crucial, so.
Any other questions?
Okay, the trusted adult thing is so awesome. I'm just wondering how much penetration do you have throughout the U.S., and are you doing anything in the D.C. area? Thank you.
We piloted in 20 schools in New Hampshire last year. Well, I left being in a school after 12 or 13 years, and it was supposed to be a pause to write this book and further develop what we had created in our school to share with other communities, because I was being asked to go to different schools. And my plan was to get back in the classroom. I'm a theater teacher. I don't know if you all caught that. Revealed later. And then a pandemic. And so I actually had a lot of time to continue to create resources before I returned to schools. And then it took off. So in New Hampshire, we were able to pilot our advisory program and the school-wide assessment in 20 schools, and we're met with really incredible results. And we actually, very exciting news, just received a large grant to make our resources free to every school in New Hampshire for the next 2 years, which is very, very, very exciting. Yes. And that's as far, we certainly have been speaking and running trainings and been at conferences in a lot of different places. New York State we've spoken with, Rhode Island we've spoken with, but that's as far as we've gone. We really are new in a lot of ways. So,
to the DMV.
Okay. Can I stay with you? Yes, please. Happy to share. And my colleague Kim is here as well with information and resources. And I'm not here, it's not a sales pitch, please. This is about a mission, and there's other programs out there that support exactly this mission as well. We're just about getting resources and training to adults out there who will show up and are interested in building their capacity to support youth.
All right, we have about 2 minutes. No pressure on anybody, but we have about 2 minutes if anybody has a closeout question. Otherwise, I will just thank you all for being so dynamic and so wonderful and answering the protective actor questions that have come up since the very beginning of the morning.
Yes.
So thank you all. It was a pleasure being up here with
Thank you.
For moderating.
Thank you.